Good evening, everyone. I'm Noah Albaum. I coordinate programs at the Jewish Community Library, which is a program of Jewish Learning Works. And I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation on cooking alla Giudia, with a celebration of the Jewish food of Italy with author Benedetta Jasmine Guetta. I'd like to thank our co-presenters for this event, the Italian Cultural Institute of San Francisco and the Consulate General of Italy in San Francisco. This event is made possible in part by Emily Brewer in honor and memory of Dr. Richard Brewer. And I'd like to thank all of the friends of the Jewish Community Library for helping to make this program and so much of what we do possible. And I hope you'll consider supporting the library by becoming a friend if you aren't already at www.friendsofthejcl.org. Before we begin, automated closed captioning can be accessed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitles, and you can also turn subtitles off by clicking on that button and selecting Hide Subtitles. Because we have a large number of attendees, everyone will be muted by default except for our presenter, but there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat and I will relay them to Benedetta, time permitting. Benedetta Jasmine Guetta is an Italian food writer and photographer. She was born in Milan and now lives in Santa Monica, California. In 2009, she co-founded Labina, the first Jewish and kosher cooking blog in Italy, specializing in Italian and Jewish cuisine. Since then, she has been spreading the word about the marvels of Italian Jewish cooking in Italy and abroad, and her work has been featured in numerous news outlets in Italy and abroad, including the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Elle à Table, Saveur, and Tablet. She has also previously co-authored 2 cookbooks in Italian, and this is her first English language cookbook. Benedetta, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the high praise and the opening notes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today and giving me a chance to talk to you about this topic that is very dear to my heart, Jewish Italian cuisine. I will open a presentation for you all to follow while I speak, mostly because I'm going to throw some dates and some numbers at you, so you can just see them. But it's not school. I'm not going to test you at the end. So let's just get going. Let me try if Zoom allows me to start sharing screen. Okay. So I guess I've already been dutifully introduced, so I can skip my introduction slides in which I was going to tell you about myself. And I can already move on to the topic of our presentation, which is, like I said, the Jews of Italy. When I do this type of talk, I generally ask questions to the audience. I can't do it today because there's too many of you. But one of the questions that I like to lead with is generally, did you know that there are Jews in Italy? Because a lot of the people that I get to talk to tell me, oh, are there Jews in Italy? That's really weird. I never knew. And the answer is yes, plenty of us. Not as many because we're a tiny community, but enough of us. There's about 35,000 in the country. And when I talk about our cuisine, literally the only thing that people seem to have ever heard about us, maybe in an optimistic case, is the fried artichokes. Delicious, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more to our cooking than the fried artichokes. So assuming that this is all you ever knew about the Jews of Italy, I'm going to try dig a bit deeper and tell you more about our history, our food, and our culture. And I hope you'll be interested enough and then, dig in more for yourself and read the book if you care. So how do I change the slide? Here. So how did the Jews arrive in Italy? The Jews arrived in Italy back in the Republican age of Rome. That makes us really one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, probably the oldest, yet, like I said, pretty much unknown to the vast majority of Jews outside of Italy. And what is fascinating, I find, about our culture is that we're not Sephardi, we're not Ashkenazi, so we don't come, from Eastern Europe or from the Mediterranean. We come straight from Israel, from Israel before it was called Israel. In fact, it was in the 66 CE during the Jewish-Roman wars that a big bunch of Jews were transferred as slaves from the Middle East, from Judea to Rome. So these people established themselves in Rome, eventually managed to earn their freedom, became merchants, became, your average people. And then started to live among Italians. And over these different centuries, their relationship with Italians changed, sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worse. There were years and centuries in which they had a really good relationship and everything was fine, and years where the prosecutions and all sorts of oppressions happened. So things started to get really south for Jews in Italy in 313, when Emperor Constantine decided to convert himself to Christianity. Because once the ruler turns to another religion and becomes a bit strict about it, and then the entirety of the population sort of has to embrace it. That's when things started to go south for the Jews of Italy. There are a few other dates that I put on the screen to give you a rough idea of what happened to the Jews. Some dates you're probably already familiar with. I think everyone knows about 1492, when the Jews were expelled from Spain and therefore from parts of Italy, from southern Italy. But the real turning point that I think is relevant for us to talk about tonight, mostly because of the way it influenced Italian food and Jewish food, was the creation of the ghettos. At some point, the Pope decided that he didn't like the Jews to mingle with the Christians, because, we're bad people, and God knows what we would have done to the Christians if we mingled with them. So the Pope decided to lock all the Jews in a ghetto in Rome, though the first actual ghetto was Venice, but the ghetto in Rome is the one that we care about today the most, in 1555. When this happened, for a fascinating, anthropological situation, the Jews found themselves as imagine animals in a cage, but with the pros and cons of being in a cage in a certain way, because while they didn't have as much contact with the outside, their culture and their traditions were better preserved. So it's in the ghetto of Rome that a number of the dishes that today we consider heritage of the Jews of Italy actually developed. But I'll tell you more about those later. Another couple of dates that we want to keep in mind, and I'll mention later for as we go along and talk about food more, are the, well, I'll skip the wars and all the things, but is 1948 with the birth of the State of Israel. Because when that happened, the Jews of Italy also benefited from the influx of a number of Jewish communities from the Middle East and from North Africa that emigrated to Italy, hence renewing the Jewish community. And I was talking about that to Noah earlier. For example, the Libyan Jews, like my family, arrived in Italy at that time. Thus, like I said, renewing the local Jewish community and bringing new influences to the local cuisine. So, what is Italian food? What is Jewish Italian food? And how did the Jews and Italians influence each other's culinary cultures? In this picture, you see a dish that is very common in Italy. It's called orecchiette. We make it with these turnip greens that we call cime di rafa. And most people in Italy would think that orecchiette are a dish from the region of Apulia. Yet they're not, because it's the Jews who invented this dish. This dish came from the south of France, from Provence, brought over by Italian merchants, but nobody knows it. So I get really mad, because you need to imagine there's this big chunk of the Italian culture that people don't know, but it's of Jewish influence and of Jewish history. So I started collecting these recipes and looking into what was the contribution of the Italian Jews to Italian cuisines. And on the flip side, what was the contribution of Italy with its rules and with political landscape and with, a number of other factors over the Jewish Italian cuisine. In this little collage of pictures, you see a few other dishes that have a fascinating history. On the left, you see melanzane alla parmigiana, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So Italians didn't really cook with aubergines, with eggplants, for very, very many years. Italians thought that eggplants were poisonous. They were very suspicious of this exotic vegetable. They literally never wanted to cook with it. In the recipe books of Italy, not the Jewish ones, eggplants were described as a food for the dogs and for the Jews. Literally nobody knew what eggplants were. Now the Jews had learned to cook with eggplants from their Muslim neighbors, from the Arab countries and from Spain. So they knew that eggplants are a delicious vegetable that you can make really yummy dishes with. But it took years, and we're talking about the 18th century, actually, yeah, the 18th century, for Italians to learn to cook with eggplants. And it was literally only because the Jews brought this vegetable to their tables. Another fascinating story, which I'm going to talk to you about now instead, involves the reverse exercises. How did the Italians influence the way the Jews of Italy eat? So, like I told you, the Jews were pretty oppressed in Italy for very many centuries, especially when they were locked in the ghettos. And the popes, over numerous generations of popes, were really mean to the Jews. They were trying their very best to make the life of the Jews really miserable. When the Jews were locked in the ghetto of Rome, which, like I said, is the second ghetto we ever had, the ghetto was established in a very, very poor neighborhood near the fish market. And the Jews in the ghetto were stuck, were poor. The situation of living were really hard. The situation of living was really hard and dire. So poverty was a real issue. So what would the Jews of Rome do now that they were stuck in the ghetto? Luckily, since the ghetto was near the port, they went to the fish market. At the end of the market day, because they were really poor, so remember, they couldn't afford the real fish, they collected all of the heads and the tails and the leftovers of the fishes from the market and cooked them in a soup, which later became la zuppa di pesce, which is a very, very delicious and very distinctive dish as of still today in Rome. So it was really trying to make the most out of their difficult circumstances that saw the Jews of Italy through, like I said, centuries of oppression, and yet gave birth to delicious dishes such as, like I said, the zuppa di pesce. Below, in the other picture that you see on the screen, you can see the beginning, not the end. It's not the finished dish, it's the raw version of aliciotti con l'indivia. Aliciotti con l'indivia is a dish that later gets baked. This is the raw version, where layers of anchovies and curly endive are baked in a common house oven. Why did the Jews come up with this dish? The Jews had to come up with this dish because at some point the Pope decided that Jews were not allowed to cook big fishes. This Pope was, really bizarre and wanted to make the life of the Jews miserable. So he was like, that's okay, we're just gonna make them eat the tiny fishes. So the Jews had no choice. They had to only eat the tiny fishes, otherwise they ended up in trouble. And that's how, for example, this dish was born. It's actually delicious. You would never imagine that it was born out of, the persecution and the bizarre oppression that the Pope came up with to make the Jews miserable. So I think these are just like a couple of stories, and I've got many more. I'll tell you one more maybe, of how the Jews and the Italians met in their culinary history and influenced each other, for the good or for the bad, but creating a distinct culinary history that I think is worth telling. I'll tell you one more story that is not in this slide. There's this cheesecake that we sell in the ghetto to this day, which is like a crostata. It's like a pie that has ricotta cheese inside. How did this crostata come to be born? So the Pope decided at some point, again, just to make the life of the Jews miserable, the Jews were allowed to buy cheese, but only for themselves, for their own consumption, and were not allowed to sell it. Now, why, you would think? I don't know, because the Pope was mean. So what did the Jews do? Because they still wanted to be able to, sell their cakes and have their cheese dishes. So they started to sell this cheesecake, which was covered under a really tight lattice of pastry dough, so that it looked like they were just selling a cake, but the cake actually contained milk. It was just hidden so that the Pope and his people couldn't find out that that was actually a cheesecake. So like these are just like, I don't know, I find this very fun and fascinating because it just tells you how necessity, is the mother of all inventions, and how these two people, the Jews and the Italian, actually exchanged historically a number of recipes and ingredients and influenced each other in a way that I don't think are known to many people. I'm gonna skip the ABC of eating kosher, and I will assume that most of you are familiar with kosher food and know what kosher is. But the reason why I was about to bring it up is that when I wrote this book, I was wondering, how do we define what is a Jewish Italian dish? And on the one hand, I had no doubt that the Jewish Italian food had to be, the type of stories that I told you, like all of these stories where Jews and Italians met and influenced each other's cuisine. But on the other hand, Jewish Italian food is, if you think about it, whatever we eat today in a kosher Jewish kitchen. So I wanted to try and dig a bit deeper also into what is eaten today and how is our cooking in Italy different from that of, Catholics and Christians and whoever else lives in the country. So of course, it's eating kosher that makes us different. But there are a few ingredients and a few aspects of our cooking that I think are very distinct and special. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking like crazy and I don't know why. I hope they stop at some point. So how is our cooking different from the ones of the non-Jews people of Italy? The Jews of Italy have been known to use goose instead of pork in all of their recipes. So wherever their Christian counterparts were cooking with pork, we used goose, especially in northern Italy. So we make our own prosciutto, but we make it with goose instead of with pork, so that there are similar, not exactly the same, but similar flavors and similar recipes, yet adapted to the rules of kasherut. We obviously cook with oil, lots of it, instead of butter, because if people wanted to eat, meat in their meals, they ended up using oil instead of butter for their desserts and pastries. So you can often tell that the history of a recipe is Jewish because of the ingredients it features, such as, like I said, oil or goose instead of pork. And another classic swap that hints about the Jewish origin of a dish is the usage of broth instead of milk. One of the recipes that I have in the book that people love, that is, exquisitely Jewish, is a recipe to make lasagna. The Jews of Italy, just as much as the other Jews, truth be told, can't eat lasagna because actual lasagna is made with bechamel, which contains milk and butter and meat. So that obviously violates the rule of not mixing meat with milk, which is, one of the many rules that we can't break if you want to be a good Jew. So, so there are all of these swaps and changes in recipes that in a way make that recipe Jewish, while still being, obviously Italian, such as the lasagna. So that's why I tried to give this book a spin that was both, historical and contemporary, in the sense of what do the Jews of Italy eat today. Now, to go back to the history a little bit, it's fascinating how Italy is as a country, sorry, I think, Italy as a country has had historically a great deal of fragmentation. Italy only came together as a kingdom not many centuries ago. And so the fragmentation, the geographical and political fragmentation of Italy reflected also in the way its Jewish inhabitants lived and cooked and ate. So I wanted to take you like through a tiny tour of what are the most meaningful regions of Italy that have a Jewish presence and how historically those Jewish communities have cooked. Let me change screen. Okay. So one of the biggest and historically historically, the oldest communities of Jews in Italy established themselves, other than in Rome, in southern Italy. Southern Italy was home to the earliest and largest Jewish communities of the country for centuries. As of today, there are very little to no Jews left in southern Italy, but traditionally, these were big communities in the old days, like in the Middle Ages. And the Jews of Italy in the south brought with them, when they got there, and by trading with their neighboring countries like the Arabs and the Normans and the Angevin and the Aragonese, a number of ingredients that were unknown to their Italian counterparts, such as artichokes, eggplants, fennel, cardoons, as well as many spices. In the picture that you see on the side, you see caponata. Caponata is another dish that people think of as Italian, but it's most surely a dish of Jewish influence, mostly, as we know, from the selection of ingredients that go into it, because, like I said, Italians didn't really cook with these ingredients for generations. So next time you go, in New York or wherever you live, to have a nice caponata, think of it as a Jewish dish from Italy. In the north, closer to where I live, there were and there are two really fascinating communities, that of Venice and that of Trieste. These communities were the result of the influx of different sub-communities, I'm going to call them, of Jews that came to Italy at different times. And each of these communities brought with them different foods that then became local. The Jews that came from Germany, which in Italian we call the Tedeschi Jews, brought with them the usage of goose and duck, which, like I said, became a signature ingredient of Jewish Italian cuisine. The Ponentini from Spain and Portugal brought other ingredients such as marzipan, salted cod, and citruses that became signature Italian ingredients, as well as the Levantini that came from the Levant, obviously, who brought pine nuts, raisins, saffron, and other ingredients. When we look at the history of Jewish Italian food, for example, you can see how, I'll pick just one obvious example in Venice. Venice has a dish that's very famous that everyone seems to know, called sarde in saor. Sarde in saor are sardines that are cooked, fried, and then cooked with raisins and pine nuts and vinegar. This combination of ingredients is obviously of Jewish origins. It was the Jewish merchants that traveled and had to store their fish for a longer time that came up with the idea of saor, which is like this preparation of fish under vinegar. And yet again, the Jews of Italy, the Italians generally don't know that these are dishes of Jewish origin. Another fascinating town is Trieste. If you're ever in Italy, that's one worth visiting. Again, the community today is very small, but they had their own culinary history and their own traditions, which I tried to describe in the book. Like I said, the Jewish community of Rome is probably the most fascinating one. If you ever come to Italy, it's probably the place where you should go visit the ghetto, visit all of the Jewish institutions. Today, there are about 20,000 Jews in Rome. Rome makes up for the majority of the community of the country. And what is great about it is, like I said, the ghetto still exists, and while of course it's open and Jews are not locked into it, it did contribute to the preservation of customs and traditions and recipes as well, because the Jewish community was so tight and so connected in a way. If you ever make it to Rome, you should probably try this dish that you see in the picture. It's called pizza de veridde. It's not a pizza, as you can tell. It's actually a sweet dish, but we call it pizza nonetheless. That is served on the occasions of bar mitzvahs and what's the word for that? When a son is born and all of those things. It's a celebratory dish that you should really try. Very good. Up in the north, another very fascinating history is that of the Jews of Piedmont. There is a myriad, very many teeny weeny communities sprinkled all over Piedmont and Lombardy that barely exist today. They have a handful of Jews each, but they have beautiful synagogues and fascinating former ghettos and places that you can visit, such as Casale Monferrato, Vercelli, Asti. Their cuisine was much closer to that of the French, but still to this day, a lot of the dishes that we eat are similar to theirs. You'll find in the book a few recipes for risotto that is obviously an Italian dish, but gets different Jewish declinations according to the different holidays, as it gets enriched with ingredients, like I said, according to the holidays. And then what else? Tuscany, I almost forgot. In the center of the country, we have, of course, a number of communities there as well. As of today, probably Florence is still the biggest. And all of these communities had their own traditional foods. Especially Tuscany was an area known for its commerce with the other parts of Europe. So these were how do I say? This was a part of the country that they had a rich experience of ingredients from all over the world, influxes and influences that really allowed people to create a fascinating culinary tradition. For example, couscous. We think of couscous as a Mediterranean dish, but for generations, Italians thought of it as a Jewish specific dish, because it was the Jews mostly that brought it to Italy and taught Italians how to cook couscous. So we have a few recipes for that too in the book, which I think, like I said, describe the story of all of those merchants and Jews who lived in that part of the country. And I think that's about it for the, for a quick introduction. Now, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take them. And I'd be happy to talk more about the book if there is anything else anyone would like to know.
Thank you so much, Benedetta. We do have a few questions in the chat already, and I would encourage folks to add your questions. Margaret S. asks about what are the names of your cookbooks in Italian?
Oh, I can send them over. They're teeny weeny, they're pretty irrelevant. One is called Ricette e Precetti, and it's a book about the different recipes of the three main religions that we have in Italy. So therefore, it's a complicated book. I co-authored it with the girl that wrote the stories that come with it, and I wrote the recipes. Yeah, I just would probably not bother if I were you guys to try and find them. Like if I were to buy a book, I would buy this one in English. It makes much more sense.
Great, and we'll put the link to purchase.
I'd be happy to send them over later, but it's just like if I were to spend time, I would read this one. And I see that someone asked me if I'm familiar with the book of Edda Servi Machlin. Of course, So that's interesting. When I started researching for my book, one of the books that obviously exist and made sense on this topic is the classic cuisine of the Italian Jews. Yet the experience of Edda Servi-Macklin, if I can say, is extremely, extremely regional, even less than regional. I'm going to say, she writes about Pitigliano, which is this tiny town where she grew up, and the food that was cooked there. And while it's a treasure, as it helps us preserve the story of that part of the country, it is a very, narrow take on Jewish Italian food. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to capture in my book, was the diversity of the different regions and the diversity of the different edot, the various communities of Italy, because calling the classic cuisine of the Italian Jews that way would have led you to believe that we all eat that food, which is actually not the case. There is much more to the country than that, and much more to the Italian Jewish cuisine than what she recorded. It is a milestone book, like it's a really, really important piece of research, but I felt it was insufficient. In addition, it's unfortunately practically impossible to find. So the two things together led me to think that there was more to be done.
Thank you. Viola Butoni, who says that they're a big fan of your work, asks if you're related to Lydia Guetta.
I am. She is my father's aunt. Her book about the cooking of the Italian Jews of Tripoli is like the best thing that ever was written. It's a pity that it's only in Italian. She is a Bible of Libyan cuisine. If I had the magical power to translate and publish a book, that would be the book I would try to push out to the world. I was just discussing this with Noah earlier. The reason why I decided to write about Jewish Italian food first was that the Jewish Italian communities are very small, they're shrinking, they're very secular, lots of our culture is being lost. So I had this sense of urgency to preserve the Jewish Italian food. The Jewish Libyan food is actually super dear to my heart, and it's my favorite in the world, and that's what I eat for the holidays and things like that. But I was explaining to Noah, it's less at risk of being lost, because the Jews of Italy are fiercely, the Jews of Libya are fiercely proud of their history and their cuisine, and they're still, I don't know, for some reason they're all homesick for their country of origin. So there's a lot less of a challenge there of preserving the recipes and preserving the history, because the people that have that heritage are very proud of it, and they keep it alive. While the Jews of Italy, for some reason or another, are a lot less active into, keeping up, keeping these memories and these traditions going. When I was traveling to research the book, I met many people in many communities. Venice comes to mind as probably the most striking one, where you can meet these ladies, these grandmothers who are, with, it's not nice to say, but like with one foot in the grave. And they have these recipes that are like, most of them really complicated, for the record, like really difficult to make. And I'm like, if this grandmother dies, there's not going to be anyone else who's going to be making this recipe. Like literally, there are recipes that there are like a couple of people that still make them. So I just had this sense of urgency, like, as if you were seeing an endangered species, the pandas of Jewish Italian cuisine, to try and preserve it, because I just had the sense that this stuff would die with this generation. But I'm sorry, I digress. That was about the book of Lydia, which you should by all means get if you can read Italian or have Google Translate. It's amazing.
I did get a private question earlier about whether it's possible to find goose prosciutto anywhere in the United States or in California.
No, no, not really. You're much better off making it yourself. You can get duck prosciutto, but it's not exactly the same thing. So I would generally just, it's actually really easy to make. If you're a bit patient, anyone can do it. All it takes is time. So I would probably rather get a goose and try do it. It's fun. It's odd, but it's fun. Actually, you don't even have to buy the book because my recipe for that is on Tablet Magazine. So you can have it for free right now online.
Thank you. But you should still buy the book. And we do have a few more questions in the chat, but we have gotten a few requests for you to include your contact info, Benedetta, because
let me just
appeared so briefly.
I'm just gonna throw it in the chat, but if it's easier to remember.
And we'll include it also in our follow-up email.
Yeah. But also, otherwise, my name.mysurname@gmail.com, that should do it. Oh, sorry, I think I sent it to the wrong person. I think I sent it to someone instead of to everybody. Yeah, like your average Joe, name.surname@gmail.com.
Thank you. Gaia Molinaro says, we love your stories so much. And their question is, given the Jewish history of assimilation into secular culture, were there any notable Italian non-kosher dishes that originated in the secular Jewish community?
So I don't have a perfect answer to this question, but I have a fun story. So there is a notable Italian non-kosher dish that originates with the Jewish community. It's a recipe that I decided eventually, after much debate, not to include in my book because I wanted to keep my book kosher. But it's a fascinating story. So there is this dish in Sicily called pane cameusa. Meusa is Sicilian for milza, which is Italian for spleen. So imagine like a dirty, gross street food where you sandwich, where you sort of stir fry spleen, sort of, and then you put it into a sandwich and off you go. So as you can imagine, this is not kosher, it's not a Jewish dish. But the reason why this dish came to be was that the Jewish butchers had all of these leftover parts of the meat that they couldn't sell to the Jews, that they couldn't consume themselves. So they created a market for this, for spleen to be sold as this street food. And again, Italians think it's a Sicilian dish that they invented, but it actually is not. It's a Jewish thing that the Jews came up to get rid of the spleens that they couldn't actually sell or consume themselves. So I mean, it's just such a, I wish I could just go on and on about all of the stories, but there are just so many stories that where, you know, the two cultures met at the crossroad and influenced each other, and, you know, actually delicious things came out of the of this you know, bumping of cultures.
Thank you. Another question from Chiara Andres. Did Jewish food in Italy cross class lines once the Jews left the ghetto? Were the wealthier families eating the same food as ones with fewer means?
So once the Jews left the ghettos, it was a period of great well-being for Italy, because after the liberation from Napoleon, after Napoleon freed the country, after the country declared its independence, and the ghettos were opened, there was a time of great well-being. The Jews of Italy, that was actually the best time ever for the Jews of Italy. The Jews were able to participate in cultural life. They were able to participate in politics. That's when, for example, the best synagogues were being built because they had the money and they could, you know, they were finally free to practice their religion. So that was a great time for the Jews of Italy. And at that point, there weren't as many class lines, I would probably say. Like the Jews were in general having a good period. So I don't think that there is much of a difference, that there was much of a difference once the Jews left the ghettos. Yet, as of today, it's fascinating to observe how I'm gonna have to try and find the politically correct way of saying that. For example, in Rome, we have the Jews that are more like educated and they, got more of an international exposure, got to travel. And then we have the Jews that we call the piazza, like the authentic, rough ghetto people. And surely there is a difference in the way these people eat, because depending on how you were brought up, you would eat different dishes in your home. Some, less wealthy families still eat a lot of those traditional dishes. For example, the ones with the quinto quarto, with the cheaper cuts of meat, while you would imagine that wealthier families that have more opportunities have more of a varied diet that includes food from all cultures. This being said, I think food has been fairly, transversal for the Jews. It didn't really change much across levels of wealth, because when the wealth was there for most people, and when the wealth wasn't there at the times of the ghetto, it just wasn't available to anyone.
Thank you. We have a question from Connie Levy about the Jewish cuisine of Sardinia, and a question about the Jewish cuisine in Napoli from Kathy Sharak.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, oh yeah, and I see it. Okay, so Sardinia is a tricky one. There is very little recorded history of the Jews in Sardinia. There are dishes in Sardinian cuisine that are believed to be of Jewish influence for the shape that they have, especially some sweets. But we don't have a lot of historical evidence to support it. That's why I tend to generally leave Sardinia out of the discourse. Sardinia was, until not very many decades ago, a fairly poor, fairly rough part of the country. So it's harder to dig into the history of that part of the country because it just didn't have much, as much documented history. Like I said, we have suspicions of dishes that are probably of Jewish origins, but there isn't much to support that idea. In the meantime, I also saw that someone is asking about the traditional food for the Seder in Italy, which brings me to a funny story. The Jews of Italy, most Jewish communities don't eat lamb for Passover. It's considered bad because it's for some reason it connected to the sacrifices of the lamb in the temple, and like most Jewish communities all over the world don't eat Passover for Pesach. They have it for their Passover blessings, but they don't eat it. The Jews of Italy have this exception that their rabbis wrote for them. So one of the dishes that you would often find, especially in Rome, for Passover Seder dinner would be lamb. We have all sorts of lamb dishes that are featured on Passover, like with spring vegetables like artichokes and peas and what are they called, fava beans. In addition to that, we would probably have, well, again, it depends where you're from, but another very fascinating story is the fact that the Jews have another exception that they created for themselves in Italy about using flour. So we all know that we don't do flour on Passover, yet there are two Jewish communities in Italy, Venice and Rome, where flour is actually allowed. So under rabbinical supervision, the women of the community in Rome and in Venice gather. They make cookies with special recipes that I shared in the book for those who want to see them. And under rabbinical supervision, they use a special flour that has been certified to be kosher for Passover, that has not touched any water. And they're allowed to make cookies, which are then distributed to the community as like a community service, so that eventually they get to eat cookies as if it was, year-round type of food. But it's still Passover. So they overcome the Passover prohibitions by having this special rabbinical supervision over these ladies that make their cookies. That was actually one of the times when I went and met many of these elderly women that, for example, in Venice, get together to make these cookies. And I was so shocked of, how old these ladies are and how there is no generational, Passover. there is no continuity for these things to happen. There is actually a few cookies in Rome. They're called, I see that somebody's asked what's the name of the cookies. In Rome they make ciambellette, that's their cookie, and in Venice they make a few. They make essi, which essi means S, so they're S-shaped cookies. They make zuccherini, which means sugar cookies, which are cookies covered in sugar. But like I said, there's actually a few recipes. There's probably 5 or 6 different recipes of Passover cookies. And yes, I see someone is asking if they're oil-based. Yes, they have oil and eggs and obviously no water. And they're cooked real quick so that they just go straight in the oven as soon as they're made. And it's funny, like there is a rabbi that checks that you wash your hands, but then you dry them thoroughly, because God forbid a tiny drop of water from your hands would touch the Passover flour. So it's actually the whole ordeal to make these cookies like as Passover proof as they can possibly be. Actually, let me see, maybe I can, if you give me 1 second, I might be able to show you the pictures of when it happens.
Was Benedetta, was the picture that you showed us earlier of those kind of long S-shaped cookies, were those Passover cookies?
Yes, I think they were. Here, let me just share screen again. It just gives you an idea of how cute these traditions are, and yet how they might just get lost. So these are the zuccherini. You can see my screen, right? More or less. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. And this is the old ghetto oven. You can see that it's been there for quite a while. And this is the rabbi that supervises the whole thing. And what else you want to see? So these are the people that volunteer there. These are some more of the cookies. This is actually a great lady that knows a lot about Venetian cuisine. And then you see they wrap them up and they're kosher certified, even though, like I said, it's all stuff that contains flour and potentially could be not kosher for Passover. And yes, water would start the fermentation process, which is what would make the cookies not kosher for Passover. So yeah, I literally had to dry my hands like 17 times to make sure that that I was really dry. I see that there's more questions about are most of the Jews in Italy today Sephardic. Very good question. So Rome and Tuscany are still mostly real hardcore true Italian Jews. Up in the north, like Milan, where I come from, we have a really, really sizable community, mostly of Persians, Lebanese. Those are, I guess, the most, two predominant Edot communities. within the community, and then there's, you know, I like to say, because I'm one of them, there's the Libyan Jews, a few of us in Milan, a few of us in Rome, but most of the Jews of Italy still pray with an Italian minhag, like with their Italian rituals, with their Italian stories, with their Italian specific Italian traditions. So, for example, Milan, where I come from, the synagogue is actually split in two. Upstairs, there's the actual Italian synagogue. So, you know, I like to call them fancier, the fancier actual Italian Jews, the one where, you know, generations of Italian tradition, they pray there, while in the underneath part of the central synagogue, virtually in the cellar, I wouldn't even know how to call it, we have a Sephardi temple that prays with a Sephardi ritual. So I used to go for some of it upstairs and some of it downstairs. I never knew exactly where I belonged, but at least it was one synagogue split in two, so it wasn't too hard to commute. Bologna and Verona, calm here. So one at a time. So Bologna has, yeah. So Bologna, as Ruth said, has a very long university tradition. I believe it's the first university that was ever found. The Jews of Bologna, as of today, again, it's one of those communities where there aren't as many. There's plenty, but not as many. It's like not as many as in Milan and Rome. So it's less lively of a community than it used to be. But it surely had its own very fascinating culinary history. Not Bologna as much, but the region of Emilia-Romagna, where Bologna is, had a very, very interesting Jewish history. For example, one of the ingredients that were used in that part of the country that are still used a lot is pumpkin. And pumpkin was an ingredient that mostly, again, the Jews used way before the Italians started to use it there. So there's definitely very interesting traces of the Jewish presence in that region and how it affected the local cuisine. Now, as of today, it's a region where it's very hard to keep kosher because the locals eat a lot of pork. In most of the traditional dishes of that region, there's a great deal of pork. But the Jews had their own history there too, yes. Yeah, so just like I see someone is asking about Parma. Parma has a tiny community, but they're trying very hard to revive the community of Parma. That's also in Emilia-Romagna, since we were talking about it. What else are you guys asking me? The Jews in Venice have their own Jewish cuisine. Absolutely. Actually, well, the most fascinating cuisine is probably that of the Jews of Rome, that took up a great slice of my book. But the Jews of Venice totally have their own Jewish cuisine. And it's very interesting because, like I said, it had more of a northern influence from Germany and from the Austro-Hungaric, I guess you call it in English, empire. So they definitely had their own recipes and traditions. There are, I'm just thinking, in the book there's quite a lot of recipes that come from the community of Venice that you can read. Definitely a very, very consistent part of the Jewish Italian cuisine is that of the Jews of Venice. Ancona, somebody's asking about Ancona. Ancona is a very interesting city, and it had a very to a certain degree, a very specific culinary tradition too. So the Jews of Ancona are a funny species. You can identify them because most of the people that came from that region had their surnames being, how do I say in English, the translation of their job in Italian. So there would be people that were, oh, this is difficult in English, whatever job they had, that became their surname in Italian. So let's say I'm a writer. So if I were from Ancona, I would have been called writer. So because the Jews of that region ended up having surnames that described the jobs that their ancestors were doing. So it's generally very easy to identify the people that come from that region. Food-wise, they have a few very historical dishes. One that comes to mind that is very specific to that area is this marzipan snake that they make for some of the holidays, especially for Passover. But there aren't as many Jews left as of today in that part of the country. So again, I tried to record the recipes that were available, but that is not a very lively Jewish part of the country as of today. I see that someone is asking me about Italian being Jewish Orthodox or Reform or Conservative. That's actually hilarious that you ask. When I moved to the US, I was like, these Jews, they're not like me. You either have the real Orthodox, like the Chabad, like the black dressed Jews, or you have the completely reformed and liberal, play the guitar on Shabbat type of thing. And I was very confused when I moved here. I was like, I don't fit anywhere. And that's because the Italian Jews have their own special sauce of Judaism, in the sense that we call ourselves Orthodox. I mean, I'm pretty sure most Italian Jews would think of themselves as Orthodox. Our synagogues are pretty Orthodox. Like, we keep men separate from women and, all of the fairly Orthodox things. Yet at the same time, most Jews don't really care as much. They're very secular. So on the one hand, when we do the religious things, we do them very properly. So, we have a Jewish school and most people keep somewhat kosher and, you do all of your Jewish holidays the way they should be done. But on the other hand, in a very flexible sort of modern way. So reforms virtually don't exist. There's like a handful of them, not a thing. There are a couple of reform communities, but like peanuts, absolutely peanuts. And conservative, again, not a thing. So we're mostly Orthodox, but, Italian Orthodox, like relax. We have the rules, then we bend them, the Italian way. But it's interesting that you mentioned, because when I moved here, I thought it was very confusing, all of the different Jewish, currents that you have in the US. In Italy, it's much like you have a lot less choice.
Thank you so much, Benedetta.
So wait a second, calm. Many questions.
We did have a question about Ferrara.
Yes, Ferrara. Ferrara is a bit the same of Bologna. And whoever asked me what was it, the other thing that we discussed, Parma. Ferrara, as of today, is a city that you should really visit because it has a beautiful Jewish museum. It has a very, very, I don't even know how to say, emotional. You can get to have a very emotional visit to this beautiful old cemetery that Ferrara has, a Jewish cemetery that is really very worth visiting. Food-wise, I don't have as much to tell you. There are a couple of recipes in the book that come from that region, but it's not a city itself that distinguished itself for the cooking as much. It is well worth visiting today for other reasons, more like contemporary reasons.
Well, this has just been wonderful, and I think we've all learned so much. So thank you for just being a wealth of knowledge and bringing us all of this information about Jewish Italian culture and cuisine. And I, for one, am really excited to get your cookbook. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to close up with?
I don't think I have anything much else to say, but I'm sure that there's questions that I left unanswered, unfortunately. So if anyone wants to be in chat, in contact, you can, like I said, email me at benedetta.guetta@gmail.com. And also, if you ever get the book and you have any questions about any recipe, I'm just at the other end of my email. So by all means, please reach out.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just ask you one more question to close out, if you have an answer, which is, do you have a favorite Italian dish that you would recommend we try?
My super favorite, I was thinking about this because somebody asked me recently, and I mean, I love them all the same. They're all delicious to me. But my favorite would probably be this Roman dish called stracotto, which is like, stracotto means cooked extra long. Literally, it means overcooked, and it's just like a very simple dish of meat cooked in tomato sauce, but it's cooked forever and ever until it virtually falls apart. And it's not only delicious as a meat dish, like as a dish, as a what we call a secondo, a second dish, but then when you've made it, you make extra sauce, so then you can make pasta with the sauce of the stracotto. So you virtually make one recipe, but it makes you 2 meals, because then you make pasta with the sugo, with the sauce of the stracotto, which is also delicious. So that's just probably one of my favorites, but it's hard to pick favorites.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Very cool. Thank you, everybody. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm right here.
All right. Take care, Benedetta.
Thank you very much.
When you do write your book on Libyan Jewish cuisine.
Exactly, that's the next one. Thanks.
Take care.